Welcome to Studio 58A live here at the Jamaica Information Service, our discussion program coming to you live on Facebook. I'm your host, Vaughn Davis. Thank you to everyone joining us online, wherever you are around the world. We really do appreciate it. And as you watch, remember to send in your questions and your comments so we can put them to our guests. And like how we have you here, do us a favor now. Share this video with a friend or 2 or 20 so we can have a nice lively discussion. Now, data privacy and data protection are 2 topics that have become extremely important in this stage of the digital era. The truth is that if we're not careful, our personal information can be accessed by third parties and shared without our knowledge or consent, and used in various unethical, even criminal ways. As part of the global effort to protect people from the threat of unwanted data manipulation, a piece of legislation was recently passed in Europe called the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR for short. But why are we here in Jamaica discussing a law passed to protect persons in Europe? Well, that's why our guests are here. To my left, we have Information Security Consultant, Mr. Andrew Nooks, and beside him, we have Information Audit Consultant, Stuart Hylton. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Vaughn. Thanks for having us. And hi to all your Facebook listeners and radio followers.
All right, wonderful. So, GDPR. GDPR, we've established that this means the General Data Protection Regulation, but what exactly is it, and why should we in Jamaica care?
Well, as you said, it's a General Data Protection Regulation, but it has far-reaching effect for entities outside of the European Union. It's a European Union drafted regulation, but it seeks to protect the privacy of EU residents wherever their data may reside. So if you have an entity that processes data for persons residing in the European Union, then you become it becomes important for you. And what is significant are the fines associated with data breaches that may result in the compromise of persons' private data.
Okay. Well, what kind of data are we talking about here? What kind of data does GDPR relate to?
Personally identifiable information about persons from the EU. And important to add that the persons who would be affected are anyone who controls or processes data for EU citizens. Okay,
so I think to get more specific, are we talking about photos, videos, files, all of that? Because persons, when it comes to IT, we feel like a disconnect because we feel like we might not understand. But in layman's terms, what are we really talking about here when it talks about data that needs to be protected?
It's relating to whatever can identify you: your name, address, telephone number, mother's maiden name. And of recent, they have added a couple other parameters. The IP address that your cell phone carries. An IP address is that number that you are identified by on the internet. It also speaks about your political preference, your sexual orientation,
all those
biometric information, whether it be your thumbprint or it be your iris scan or anything that can be tied back to you.
Okay. So you mentioned a while ago that there are some serious fines involved in persons who don't necessarily comply. So what are the consequences for failing to comply with these GDPR regulations for countries like us outside who are trying to do business with persons in the EU?
The fines are very hefty, as I mentioned, and I think it goes up to 20 million euros. You can put that in the context of Jamaica. 20 million euros is no small feat for any Jamaican entity, or 4% of your global revenue. The global revenue, not just of your entity, but your parent entity. So if you are part of a larger organization, then it is the larger organization's revenue that they go after. And the whole point of making the fines so hefty is that they're more pushing for compliance rather than to penalize persons. But it's important for persons to really understand what it is that they're asking for entities to do in order to protect persons' information.
So let me ask you this. Is this a real threat? I mean, we see these legislation passed and things like that, and you wonder, is this something that's really real, or is this something that, yeah, we should be aware of it, but by and large, it probably won't really end up affecting us?
You know, I would approach it, and the question you ask is the way how we approach like hurricanes.
Okay.
You know,
okay.
Is the hurricane going to hit? And you know, so we sit back and we relax and we say, well, maybe it's going to come. You know, Blue Mountain's going to protect us again. So we don't need to pay any attention to that until the hurricane hits, and then we're scrambling. It's too late. So we don't want entities to sit back and wait and to say, well, is this going to happen? At least we want persons to be aware that it is there, so that they can start. At least if they are starting now, they would be late.
Okay.
But they can at least be aware that they will need to take some action.
All right, so when you say starting later, which brings me to the next question: when does this take effect, or when does it become in force?
Well, the GDPR was being discussed from about 4 years ago. It came into law 2 years ago, with persons getting the opportunity, 2 years opportunity to be ready.
Okay.
So, you know, it comes into effect on March 25th.
May
25th.
Okay.
Yeah, which is just a couple of weeks.
Away, actually.
Right. So, whether or not you are aware of it,
it's coming.
It is coming.
All right. So, as a company, and I suppose later as an individual, what should I be doing? You know, how do I get myself ready? If I'm a company and I know I have regular business dealings with persons who are in the EU or in the different countries in the EU, what should I be doing? If I don't know, if this is like the first time I'm hearing about it now and I'm starting to think, all right, what should I be doing?
You really should be looking at your internal controls and what you're doing to make sure you're in compliance with the GDPR. And I mean, you can start with a few questions. One is, what data do I have or process? How is it being stored? Where is it being stored? Who can access it? And once you kind of go through that process and set of questions to answer, really determine how is it that you're controlling that data to make sure you're in compliance with GDPR. And you have different ways that you can do self-assessments. You'll even find free open source tools out there that kind of assist you with what kind of questions you really need to ask and to determine your readiness. At this point, you really are trying to play catch up if you're at this point trying to do assessment. However, if you have been exposed to other regulations, such as Sarbanes-Oxley or payment card industry, you would have been exposed to some of the rules that will impact your data privacy requirements. So there are a lot of companies who would have been in the right direction of the GDPR.
It also forces entities now to look at what data they are collecting about individuals and to determine whether or not it is necessary to collect that information. So you want to ensure that your processes are aligned with the information is aligned with the processes that you're doing. You don't want to collect everything when you only need two elements of data.
So you don't necessarily want to be over here collecting your birth, your maiden name, all these kind of things. We don't really need, for example, like a phone number and an email address or something like that.
Yeah, you can imagine going to purchase something as simple as a SIM card and the agent, a prepaid SIM card at that, and so the agent is asking for your mother's maiden name. And you're like, what does that have to do with anything?
That don't seem like that relevant
they're
at
asking
all.
You to scribble that on a piece of paper and you don't know where that is going to end up. You now have a right to ask.
And that's what the GDPR is. One part of what it's enforcing. You only process or store that data that is necessary for the business that you're conducting. You're not asking for additional information that's going to be part of your overall analytics and creating a profile on the particular customer. It's a need to know basis.
So I think we can bring this down to even more to the individual common man, because I know that a lot of us in Jamaica, we do business online through social media, Instagram, Facebook, things like that. And chances are we might be taking orders for products and shipping things to persons in the EU countries, that kind of thing. So does it have implications for persons doing that kind of business transactions?
Well, where it has the greatest impact for individuals is that it puts the power back in the hands of the individuals in terms of controlling their data. They now have the right to ask the question, what are you using my data for? And have to give explicit consent. Whereas entities usually had the opportunity to by default, make persons opt in. What this does now is to say you have to explicitly ask me the question, and I have to explicitly give you an answer.
Meaning permission to
use my data. Okay. Right? It also gives the individual a right to ask for their data to be transferred. So if you are with one banking institution, for instance, and you want to decide that you want to change your relationship, you want to bank with another institution, you can ask them to transfer your data for that. If there are data breaches, there are stipulations that you have to be advised within a reasonable time frame. In this case, is 72 hours. You know, so typically when entities get breached, because of reputational risk, they don't want to tell anybody that get breached and all of that. This now says, hey, you have to tell me within 72 hours, because if I find out, then I can take action.
So, I mean, that begs the question, who is the person that's going to bring the action against which, let's say a company out here has some problem and some data is breached? Which entity or which body is the one that's monitoring this situation?
There would be a complaint that is lodged to the data commissioner, and that would be set up in the EU, and the data commissioner would in turn, pursue the complaint. The other thing is that there is somewhat often bypassed article within the data protection, the GDPR, that says that entities that are established in the EU should have a representative, whether or not you have a brick and mortar structure. You should have a representative in the EU that is responsible for taking those queries from EU citizens and relaying those queries and ensuring that the citizens' rights are being observed, or they have a channel in which to pursue whatever challenges that they have, without the hassle of having to try to contact an overseas entity which may or may not speak their language.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, that makes a whole heap of sense. That makes sense. And in researching this topic, it says that the GDPR is retroactive. Yes. What does that mean for affected companies or persons?
Just like it sounds, that their action can be taken against you for breaches that have occurred before the act has gone into place, or becomes fully effective on May 25th.
Okay. So if you have data for EU citizens, for argument's sake, and you can't prove that you have gotten the explicit consent to be holding that data, then it means that you could find yourself in breach.
Okay. So even if this breach happened like 2-3 years ago, I still need to be...
You still need to be cognizant
aware of what's going on, and be aware that some action might be taking place in the future.
Some action could possibly take place.
Now, I don't think we really looked at it, but did we, to go back to the issue of social media, and me as a little man who has a little business that does a little delivery to persons in Europe, I might send 2 patty, or I might send, some shoes or some Jamaican things, because they love Jamaican things. If it is, for example, I have somebody come and hack my system, because I have a contact list with all my people who I send things to, and I have them information, their address, them phone number, them kind of things. Am I liable if something happened? If you know what I mean? Can I be called into question, like a big company, for example?
It is always a challenge to look at size and to try to determine whether or not you still should be compliant. You have, when we look at small entities, we look at it from the perspective of size. I'm a one-man, but there's also a revenue side of that, because you could be a one-man making millions of money from that. But the thing is that one of the things that the GDPR promotes is that it wants persons to prove that they are being prudent and proactive, right? Nobody knows what the security challenges are going to be tomorrow. So you could take all the necessary steps today, and a breach still occurs. But if you are audited and you're found wanted, in other words, wanting. In other words, you have not taken those prudent steps to protect the information that you're collecting, then you
might very well face
you
a
might
challenge.
very well face a challenge right there.
Okay. All right. So what kind of privacy regulations are people now required to be aware of? Is there any kind of standard practice? For example, if I want to get myself in order as a company, where can I go and kind of have an appreciation of how I should be setting up my operation to make sure I'm in compliance with the GDPR?
Well, that's you have experts in the field, and I think we would promote ourselves as that, because we have been working in data security in particular for a number of years, and in systems and data auditing for a number of years. But there are some steps that individuals can take. One, the first thing is to understand. Once you understand your business and what drives your business, then you know that's the starting point. You know what information and what data you will need to make your business grow and thrive. If you understand that and you understand what the regulations are, then you can start putting controls in place for that. I look at it from the Art of War, Sun Tzu.
Okay.
Sun
This should
Tzu,
be interesting.
in the Art of War, Sun Tzu says, and I paraphrase, if you know yourself and you know your enemies, then you will not lose in 1,000 battles.
Okay.
If you know yourself,
you know your weaknesses and know what's going
exactly,
on.
and knowing yourself is knowing your business, knowing what information you need to make your business work, knowing your customer, knowing your customer base, knowing all your services, knowing all your processes, then you're well on your way. But the other part is knowing your enemies, knowing what is out there to get you, what are the different scenarios or motivation for someone to get to the core part of your business. If your business is based on data, then the core part of your business is data. What are the things that you're going to put in place? Knowing who and what is out there that threatens that, you'd now be informed enough to put controls in place to match that threat. And so, you know, you will be resilient against certain forms of attack.
I think it's a good time to remind persons that the kind of fines that they might face if they, because I still think there are some people out there probably not paying attention. But well, boy, this is not really a big deal. Just remind them of the consequences of what might happen if they choose not to get their house in order.
I'd say before persons focus on the fines.
Okay.
Think about it as just an opportunity for improvement. There, you know, a lot of the times persons take compliance as a, you know, it's just a regulation as, you know, trying to hinder some of my business processes, or it may cause me to be conscious of how I may be penalized if I don't meet the compliance. But one thing about the GDPR, it really is giving you, you know, steps and things to put in place that will help you become more proactive in how you use your data and being protective of that data. And we see it becoming more commonplace nowadays. The Data Protection Act is being looked at, and persons in Jamaica will have to be cognizant of what they have to do when that becomes effective. And having started the practices of the GDPR can help you in that direction towards such protection. And you see it happen with, I know Andrew can speak more to example what happened with Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook information.
That's so popular. I think we should just reference it so persons can follow along.
Yeah. But I want to add to what Stuart was saying, and liken it to our Jamaican situation. When the fines for traffic offences were increased, everybody was there crying out to say, boy, these fines are too high. But that wasn't the spirit of the fines. The spirit of the fines was to get persons to comply. Right? So if you're thinking that the fines are too high, it means that you have already made the decision that you're going to continue your behavior, you're going to pay those fines, but you want it to be reasonable so you can pay it. And that's, I think, the spirit of the fines, which is why Stuart would say, we don't want to focus so much on the fines, we want to focus on putting in the controls.
Fair, but I still think you just tell them what it is all the same, just in case they might not be paying attention.
And just in case you're not aware, for entities, it's 20 can be up to 20 million euros or 4% of your global revenue.
Whichever is greater.
I mean, I don't even know what the math is for euros, but I think it's 20 million times 160 something now. You know,
God.
you know. So
It's
put
an
that into
instant
context.
bankruptcy. Alright.
Put that into that just says pack up shop and go home.
We're covering from that.
For some entities, I mean, but guess what? Suppose your revenues are a trillion euros. Then it may just be a drop in the bucket for you.
Yeah.
I don't know
many like that in Jamaica.
I mean, I mean, in the case of you know, and Stuart just mentioned Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica, they may be able to pay those finances.
I don't think any company willingly wants to pay that kind of money. So compliance is the way. Just in case you're misunderstanding anything, comply.
It's much easier. It's much easier to buy to go out and find a piece of board and board up your window, right? Than it is to try to rebuild your house after a hurricane. You know what I mean? So board up the windows.
All right. So, well, this is the attacks on sensitive data are becoming more and more often. So, how does an organization have to protect the data? What kind of steps can they take to actual literal steps they can take to protect their data when dealing with GDPR and other kind of considerations when it comes to data protection and security and that kind of thing?
Well, I think, as again, you have to ask yourself the question, what data are you storing? And you do the assessment as to see how valuable is the data that you're processing, amongst other things that you're trying to determine the value of within your business. And you can look at what is most appropriate for that data and how much you need to do to protect it. Because we're not going to say apply the gold standard in information security standards if all you're trying to protect is a chair. You know, if you are, you know, if you're in the finance industry and you're processing credit cards, then you're going to need to look at PCI. Yeah,
some serious major data protection mechanisms.
If you're in the healthcare industry, then you'll be looking at HIPAA. So there's no one template that fits all. But you know, and Andrew can speak to it more. But you really have to determine what is most appropriate for you and what you're trying to protect. Well, what's the value of it?
How I like to put it is that you don't have to go out and buy a Rolls Royce or in our case a Range Rover to do the job of a donkey cart.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
What I mean? So you have to align. If all your business is on one laptop and everything, then some of the basic control is I'm not going to use my laptop to go on certain sites. I'm not going to connect to free Wi-Fi because my data is there. I'm going to encrypt my hard disk. I'm going to ensure that I have a good anti-malware software out there, and I'm also going to be vigilant as to who plays around with my machine and all of that. So you put in controls in place.
So I think this has been a good introduction to the topic, but for persons who might want to get more information and get a more full appreciation of what GDPR means for them and how it could potentially affect their business, what are some of the resources that they could potentially look at to learn some more information?
Go ahead.
There is a website that is set up in EU that is focused on GDPR. There is also this organization that I've recently been looking at, IAPP.org. They have quite a bit of resources on GDPR.
Okay.
So, and if you're curious about GDPR, it's very topical. You go to your browser, you type in GDPR and you'll see unlimited resources coming up about GDPR, how it affects you wherever you may be, or how it benefits you as an individual, and how it will affect you as a representative of an organization. And as a colleague of mine likes to put it, even if you are the man on the street side that is selling patties, but you want to maintain a good customer relationship, so you maintain a customer database, then it may apply to you. And to bring it home, I mean, the data protection bill has been tabled and is being discussed.
Right.
And some aspects of the data protection bill is likened to that of GDPR. So whether or not we want to focus on GDPR, is going to become important that we understand our data protection, our pending Data Protection Act, and understand your rights as an individual and understand your responsibility as an entity that is collecting.
Okay.
Personal information.
Our technical person just sent us a question. How does it compare to our data protection bill in Jamaica, GDPR?
It's quite similar. I think it was the Jamaica Data Protection Bill was drafted for the predecessor, I think, for the most part, and then adjusted. The predecessor for the data protection regulation, I think that one was the 1995 Data Protection Directive. And, in the EU, the difference between the directive and the regulation is that for the regulation, it's law, everybody has to follow. For the directive, you can use the directive as a guide to develop your own as a EU country.
And it's important to note as well that even though the UK will be pulling out of EU, their data for their citizens is still impacted by the regulation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think that for me might be a good point to wrap unless we have more questions. Wait, let me ask. Seems to have another question.
I can always say if anybody is ever in need of additional assurance around whether your company is doing well or anything in information security, feel free to contact SYMPTAI Consulting Limited.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely offer you a data privacy assessment. I don't know, do you do that for free, SYMPTAI?
All right, but as technocrats, what do you think about NIDS and how the implications that might have for data protection, maybe even GDPR?
Yeah, I was trying to, hoping that I didn't have to touch on NIDS and everything. But I think from the perspective, NIDS have a lot of implication for data and collecting of data wherever citizens go and wherever they try to do business. So as many experts have argued, the Data Protection Act should be a what you call it now? Should come before before NIDS. Because then it would give persons a little bit more comfort in knowing that there is a responsibility for persons to protect their data. And I think persons would rest a little bit easy if they are aware of the Data Protection Act and can put that in relation to NIDS. All
right. Well, I guess that's something for us to follow up on and see to the extent to which Data Protection Act is going into, and we'll dovetail with GDPR, NIDS, all of these things. Gentlemen, I think it's a good time for us to wrap. I think this was a useful discussion. I think more persons are aware, especially based on the fines, even though we're trying to push compliance. We're pushing compliance, but I think that should have gotten everybody's attention. All right, we just want to say thanks to everybody who tuned into our discussion. And if you have any issues or any questions you might want to ask, you can add them in the comments below the video. We'll be going through after the video to try and answer them, and if we can't, we'll send them to our friends here and they can answer them for us. So make sure that we keep you looped in. Remember, our audience plays a major part in our show. If there's anybody in particular that you'd like to have us in studio, let us know, and we'll work as hard as possible to get them in studio so you can have them and have the interchange and you can ask all the questions you want. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Jamaica Information Service to find out who will be in studio next. We do this every Thursday live on Facebook. I've been your host, Vaughn Davis, and this has been Studio 58A Live. Thank you again for joining us. Our guests were Mr. Andrew Nooks, correct?
That's correct.
Stuart Hylton.
And they're from SYMPTAI Consultants Limited. Just make sure I got that right?
SYMPTAI Consulting, yes.
All right, wonderful.
Almost perfect.
Almost perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I've been your host, Vaughn Davis. Thank you and have a good day.